Thank you very much, Aaron. Great to see you, and hello to everyone. Um, I'm so happy to have this opportunity, and I'm coming to you from Egypt, so the speeds may be a little slow. I hope you can hear me. And perhaps I should turn it back to you because we have a video presentation.
Hello, I'm John Liu, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to speak with you today remotely. I'm also very grateful to the Common Land Foundation and the Mustard Seed Trust that make it possible for me to do this work. I have been a professional witness and a student of transformational change in politics, economics, culture, and ecology over my entire adult life. In the 1980s, I helped open the CBS News Bureau, and I was able to cover the rise of China from poverty and isolation and other geopolitical events like international terrorism, the Tiananmen tragedy, global leader conferences, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. But in the early 1990s, the World Bank asked me to film a baseline study for a very large development program called the Lus Plateau Watershed Rehabilitation Project. This area is the cradle of Chinese civilization, so it's the birthplace of the Han race, and it has a very interesting soil type. It's Lus, that's what it's named for. And it's a geomorphological soil caused by the movements of glaciers high in the Himalayas, pulverizing the rocks and sending a type of really powdery dust down over millions and hundreds of millions of years. And this area gave rise to the largest ethnic group on the planet and one of the most effective cultural developments in the world, but over historical time, it was fundamentally degraded. And so when I went there, it was really like a moonscape. Now I'm going to ask Jürgen Vogele, who's now the vice president of the World Bank and was then the project manager of this project, to tell us a little bit about what they found when they first got there.
Now, when we came to this place in the Loess Plateau the first time, we were all really shocked. We thought, oh my God, well, how can ever anybody try to rehabilitate an area that is so huge and so fundamentally destroyed ecologically? And the truth is, we spent 2 years working with the local people, with the farmers, with the local officials, with the experts in the various fields of hydrology, soil and water conservation, forestry, agriculture, environment, try to understand what it would take to do something like this. And after 2 years, we still didn't have many answers. The World Bank didn't have the answer, and the local people didn't have the answer. And we spent another year and a half talking to the farmers in the villages, trying to understand what they had done in the past 20 or 30 years that was successful. And it was really interesting. Not much was there to show, because the current practices at that time were just not sustainable at all.
So it was fascinating to see almost an anachronism. It's like looking at Neolithic agriculture. And the analysis by the Chinese and by others was that it had to be done, but there was little evidence at this kind of scale that massive transformational change could happen. And in the analysis was an understanding of basic ecological function and the loss of this basic ecological function And that meant that the hydrology, the soil fertility, the productivity, the ability just to have vegetation and wildlife and the biodiversity were all massively disrupted. And it was clear that this was causing weather changes and climate changes, but the complexity of it was daunting. And it was so historical in nature. There had been 1,500 floods recorded over historical time where millions of people died. It's kind of the basis of the kind of character of the Chinese people, because they always had to rebuild their lives after being wiped out again and again. And so as this was being contemplated, could this happen? The situation moved into another era. Instead of analyzing the dysfunction, they started to talk about, let's restore the functionality. And this, I think, is of critical importance as we look at the rest of the world and as we determine what it is that we're trying to do. Because in many ways, over the very long period of historical time, the idea has been to constantly increase productivity. But in this concept of constantly increasing productivity, we've seen massive impacts on ecological function. And it's necessary to ask a question: what are the primary systems? Is functionality more important than production? And is production something which emerges from functional ecosystems? And looking at this large degraded landscapes and considering the simple methods that they're using on these landscapes. So obviously they're terracing, but really it's an integrated program. This is just a stage in what they were working on. And they're doing it in a very simple way with hand tools and so on, but then gradually they move to a little bit larger equipment. And everyone is being paid. So it's quite interesting to realize that this is an economic shift that could provide full employment if the value of this is recognized. So instead of putting the value in productivity, if we put the value in ecological function and just paid everybody to make the earth functional. Now I have Mr. Ta-Fu Yuan from the water department was involved in localized interventions here, and he's going to tell us a bit about what they were doing.
The goal was to give a hat to the hilltops, give a belt to the hills, as well as shoes at the base. The hat meant that the top of these hills had to be replanted with trees. The belt meant that terraces had to be built, to be used for crop planting and also for trees. The shoes were the dams which we had to build, so that the hills could grow back to life and our economy, as well as our lives, could improve.
When I first filmed Mr. Ta-Fu Yuan and his colleagues back in 1995, I had no idea this initiative could achieve such dramatic results. The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land. So it's interesting to note that these transitions were at 14 years, and the transitions were repeated in The Age of Nature on PBS, which is available on several streaming services now. And you can see it's even better. And what this is doing is infiltrating and retaining moisture, restoring soil microbia and fungal nets, and it's lowering surface temperatures. It's a fundamental change.
I think this place, Baviaanskloof, is could be a pilot and a very important example to show how this new economy would work.
When I look out at these highly degraded landscapes, it's possible to feel sadness for the degradation, but it's also a huge opportunity, isn't it?
Oh yeah. It's a tremendous opportunity.
In the 20th century, you have seen that the value of nature has gone away in one way or another. It's not in our system. So people and financial institutions, but also industries, governments, have seen it as a kind of separate thing.
We're facing climate change.
Yeah.
How are we going to deal with climate change? The talk just goes on and on and on. But yet here is something that can be done.
Yeah, these especially these man-made deserts, we can turn them into green areas again. It's lots of effort, it's lots of labor, but we have the financial means to do it, and it will sequester, it will be carbon sinks. But we just have to shift our attention to the natural systems. I only know that we have to work fast to get a model ready for companies, investors, and states, governments, to restore landscapes. So what I propose is that we go to a system where we have 4 returns per hectare, and that a financial return or an investment return is a logical thing, but there are other 3 returns. The return of natural capital, or the return of nature, you could say, here. The return of jobs, very important, because we are talking about people who want to work or need work and want to live well. But maybe the most important is return of inspirational capital, or return of inspiration. If you bring the return of inspiration back in the landscape, it will also bring back a return of meaningfulness in people themselves.
We often talk about like the flow of capital or the flow of money, but actually there's all kinds of flows, the flows of the water, the flows of the air, and the natural flows. And we haven't really been valuing those.
No, I think, but that has to do with the flow of the human mind, I think. The flow of the human mind has been, over the last centuries, much more into the pure economic or financial flows, and bringing the balance back in the landscape is also about bringing back the balance between nature and man in the human mind. So the landscape is actually reflecting, or let's say the state of the landscape is reflecting the state of the human mind, the state of your inner self.
I think we're at a turning point because so many things are happening, and I think everyone can recognize now that it's absolutely necessary to restore the life support systems on the planet. We simply have too much knowledge to allow for the continuation of unsustainable, irrational, greedy, and ignorant actions. that are causing massive, massive changes to the earth. And I really don't want to enumerate all the quite tragic and difficult things we're enduring at this time. I just want to note that it is in this type of crisis that in China at least, there's a saying that it's a Wei-Ji situation, which means there's extreme danger, but there's also great opportunity. So I would prefer to focus on the opportunity. We know, for instance, that many people are depressed at this time. There's a kind of a terrible funk all over the world. And in the worst cases, it's breaking out into violence and terrible unhappiness and suffering. And I think what's interesting about this is that for those of us who have been studying and working in ecosystem restoration, we can see that there's fun and excitement in seeing that the hydrological cycle can be restored, or that biodiversity can increase. It doesn't have to decrease continuously. And it's possible to grow fertile organic soils and to have and eat really nutritious and healthy foods. And that there's tremendous abundance on the earth. This is not a place of scarcity. This is a planet which is filled with beauty and joy and symbiosis. It's a miracle. It's the only planet we know that has an oxygenated atmosphere, a freshwater system, fertile soils, and amazing biodiversity. This is what we need to focus on. And we need to understand the value of that. For much of human history, people have been considering the things that they extracted from the earth and manufactured and turned into products, and thought that these were more valuable than the earth systems itself. And you can see this in the way the gross domestic product is the basis of the mercantile and materialistic economies that have grown up around the world. And we need to look carefully at this and to understand that all of the things that human beings have ever made and all of the things that human beings will ever make are worth less than the oxygenated atmosphere, the freshwater system, the fertile soils, and the amazing biodiversity on the earth. And the fact is, when we study this, we learn that all life is in symbiotic relationship with all other life, that the substances in our bodies are the same substances that have been in other bodies, that we're all an expression of all life since the beginning of time. It can't be any other way. And our DNA has the map of everything that has happened in life. We are literally stardust. We are literally connected to the life's energy throughout the universe. And as human beings, we are going to pass away from this dimension. We have to ask a question. Are we human beings seeking to have a spiritual experience? Or are we spiritual beings who are spending a short while having a human physical experience in this dimension? And I would say that the latter is the truth, because we live and we die, and death is part of life. And this is why we have compost. This is why we have soils, living organic soils. This is how all organisms are related to one another and have co-evolved and co-created an oxygenated atmosphere, a freshwater system, fertile soils, and amazing biodiversity. And this is the only planet that we know. And we are looking, we're spending vast amounts of money, we're spending tremendous amounts of energy looking throughout the universe, the known universe, to find out if there are other planets like this. And this is the only one we know. So I think it's the moment that we have here is we're facing multiple crises. And the trajectory that human civilization and human society has been on cannot remain this way. We are forced to change or face serious consequences. We are already experiencing them. We can all understand this. We need now a tsunami of consciousness that travels throughout the world, where this knowledge becomes the common knowledge, the collective intelligence of humanity. And the central intention of human civilization is not to go shopping, is not to be workers for some tiny minority of people who are stealing the ability and the intelligence and the energy of people all over the world, but to realize we're all equal. And that in that equality, we can work together as a species. And as a species on a planetary scale, we can restore all degraded lands on the earth. This is a new point. This is our time. This is what we have been called to do. And we are answering that call. What I've noticed in going to camps around the world and working together with other people to do restoration is that it's very satisfying. And it creates the most value. So it's not just an esoteric feel-good thing. It is the basis of wealth. It is the basis of survival and sustainability. It is a recognition and a participation in the multiple symbiotic systems that we live in. Our problems are physical. We're not going to solve them by clicking like. The internet will not massively restore the hydrological cycle or the weather systems or the climate, or remove toxicity from the earth, or remove pollution, or end waste. Those are things which we have to do physically. But the internet and communications can help us to understand that we're all one family. We're all indigenous. And the concept of domination is horrible. It's the worst expression of human greed and ignorance. And it leads to war, and it leads to destruction and suffering. And we don't need that. We can transcend that. We need to live the change that we want to see on the earth. Because then we are feeling and understanding what's happening to us. We should listen to the birds. We should listen to the subtle changes in temperature and wind and moisture. We should see and experience the beauty of symbiosis and biodiversity. What an amazing world we live in. And as we do that, our thoughts change. We stop thinking about what's in it for me, and we think about how can we serve? How can we manifest what we know is possible? Some of you are aware that I've helped to found the Ecosystem Restoration Camps movement. And that in 6 years, that movement has grown to 55 camps in 6 continents. I think there can be thousands or tens of thousands of camps. There could be millions. This can be of huge importance to the refugee communities, to the communities of people whose societies were damaged by colonization, by imperialism, by genocide, by slavery, by overexploitation. And it can bring back their rights, and it can balance their rights with their responsibilities. But as they restore their ecosystems, as their land and their sovereignty is returned to them, the earth will flourish. The ecosystems will be restored. The only agency that can do that now is humanity on a planetary scale. This is the great work of our time. We're forced to understand this. And if we do, we can join others on a flourishing path that leads to tremendous beauty, to joyful, lighthearted work that makes sense. It's part of the economy of love, and it's something which is essential and necessary. And it allows us to engage everyone and anyone who wants to participate in this work, so it can lead to full employment in production of food and in processing and preparation and storage of food, central kitchens. Another thing I think is critically important are creator spaces. We need to stop buying new things. We need to recycle and upcycle all the waste. So we can have machines for woodworking, metalworking, for mechanics. We can have industrial sewing, we can have ceramics, we can have design, and so on. We can even go up to 3D printing and computer numeric design and robotics if we want to, but we better save the Industrial Revolution and make it serve, and make the ability to fabricate things serve everyone. I like to imagine the creator spaces have retired engineers and scientists and artists and craftsmen and mechanics, and they curate. They have, all the communities have perfect shops, and all the people who want to work in these shops have a chance. But it's a little bit like the Karate Kid. You know, the Mr. Miyagi is in charge of training. And so they have to wipe on and wipe off until they have total respect for the tools and the knowledge that they're able to learn. And let's not have any isms. Let's have consciousness. Let's have truth. Let's have trust. Let's have faith. Let's work together. The other thing I think we have to have is cultural stages. We have to have the ability to transfer culture from one generation to the next. And we have to do that in a way which is not just celebrity driven, where there are certain stars in the celestial heavens, and the rest are just fans. We have to give everybody's ability to express themselves a stage. So all camps and communities could have cultural stages. So central kitchens, creator spaces, cultural stages. And in doing this, we're going to engage so many people in wonderful creativity. And that can then go also to the people who are working in the central kitchens or working in production, in food forests, or in syntropic agroecology systems. And we'll be able to transition and transform all of the monoculture industrial agriculture. We can eliminate chemicals and toxicity. We don't need them. And I can tell you from long study, biodiverse systems, functional ecosystems, are more productive than degraded systems. Once we understand that functional ecosystems are more productive than degraded ones, that's when we see millions and billions of people doing restoration around the world are the way forward. For everyone to have meaningful work and for the very difficult work that needs to be done to be done. Well, I'm waxing philosophical. I can tell many stories, but I just want to tell you how happy I am that we're moving into a new phase, that nature-based restoration is being recognized more and more. And you are the reason that it's happening. And this movement can grow and grow and grow until it becomes the central intention of human civilization. And that's when our children and future generations can have a beautiful life. That's when we have understood and achieved our purpose on the earth. Thanks so much for listening. You can find my writings here. If anybody wants to reach out to me, the organizers can give you my contact information, but my email is johndliu@icloud.com if you want to write to me. And I look forward to more conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liu. And thank you so much for being here with us from Egypt. It's pretty amazing to have you remotely. It's technology is, the Industrial Revolution is working in our favor in this case. All right, would love to take some questions from the audience. I don't know if there's a volunteer who can help me run mics. I'm happy to run a mic, but show of hands. Great. Marie, will you grab another one and keep your hands up if you've got a question. I'm going to start here. And
thank you for your talk. I'm curious, we're in the United States in a sort of high cost of labor environment, and I'm wondering how you see these ecosystem restoration projects working out in these higher cost labor places, if you can speak to that a little bit.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the honorary doctorate. I actually dropped out of college to be a television cameraman, so I have spent a lot of time in research, but anyway. Yeah, I think that when you look at the economy, to address your question, when you look at the economy, you are looking at something which has some fundamental structural flaws in it. That it's imagining that production and consumption and buying and selling things, and to somehow it's also gone to speculation between the cost and price and interest-bearing debt, which actually don't produce anything. They're kind of conceptual and they're a little bit corrupt. So if you look at these things and you say, well, this is the basis of the economy, there's nothing we can do about it, then why? Why is there nothing we can do about it when this is destroying the ecological function on the earth, which gives us life? So for us to believe in a false narrative, a false God of materialism as the basis of wealth, we're not correct, because the more material things we extract and manufacture, and the more we shift to speculation between the cost and price and interest-bearing debt, the worse the situation gets. So that doesn't seem like it's a really something that we have to hold on to. It's something that we have to understand. And then we have to have another concept. And that concept for me is that ecological function is vastly more valuable than material things. And so we have to change the economy. The other part of that is that we're saying that if you have money, you have human rights. But if you have no money, you die in the street. That doesn't seem to make any sense to me. I don't understand it. So, it's not up to an individual to decide what human civilization does. It's up to the collective understanding of humanity. So is the best we can do that, like, we're going to greed and self-interest and corruption are the guiding principles for humanity. I don't think so. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? All the way up at the top.
Good morning, Yate. Good to see you from Egypt. I've always admired China, and I was supposed to go to Shanghai right a week before the rebellion. So I never made it to China, but I still have admiration for the country. I live on the Navajo Reservation, Navajo Nation. The United States government still honors the treaty that we signed in 1868. And we don't own the land. It's held in trust by the United States government. It doesn't allow us to really care for the land to the fullness of our genetic disposition. In China, do they own the land? And I understand the economy of love. We call it ke in my culture. And during the pandemic, I know for sure, like 18 months, I personally lived on less than $500 a month. And I'm still standing because it was the economy of love that I lived on. So how does an individual Chinese person understand or have a concept of love or self or ownership? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, personally, I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and grew up in Bloomington, Indiana. But I have spent 40 some years studying and documenting of China. And I've been to 90 countries around the world, either as a journalist or as an ecological researcher. And I would say people everywhere on the earth are pretty much the same. They all get up in the morning and have breakfast, and the children usually go to school, and the old people hang out and take care of the home, and the middle-aged people go and do some quite serious work somehow. You know, the Chinese don't actually own land. They have land use rights, and this was brought about after the communists took over in 1949, but it took 2 years to have a land reform program. And in that land reform program, the land was nationalized, and then it was distributed to people, and they called that, at that time, a peasant revolution. So they had a lot of people who were basically landless, and I guess in the European feudal way would have been serfs. And they just said, well, everybody's equal. There are no serfs anymore. And they divided up the land based on how many people you had in your family. But China's sort of complex. If you want to talk about China, there's a lot to unpack there. But it's an interesting place with 56 different nationalities. And they really, you know, have gotten along, sort of. You know, there's big nationalities like the Han are the most numerous, and the Mongols actually brought all of like the Tibetans and the Chinese and the Mongols. It was the Mongol invasion that made them all part of the same country back in the Yuan dynasty. And then the Ming and the Qing dynasty came after that, so that they didn't give away Mongolia and Tibet after the Mongol emperors were deposed after several hundred years of their rule. So it's complex problems, you know, write to me and we can have a long conversation, although I'm 70, so don't wait too long. Yeah, but you know, we can talk forever about that. So this is not long enough to discuss the nuances there.
Thank you so much for your response. I think that is all the time that we have for questions right now. Please, a round of applause for John.